Throughout the 1990s, dinosaurs were all the rage, thanks to a perfect storm of media hits leading up to and during the decade that made a huge leap all the way to the forefront of popular culture. Walk the Dinosaur was a hit in 1989, kids became best friends with Barney, and the dinosaur sitcom ran for 4 seasons on ABC. It all came to a head in 1993 with the release of Jurassic Park, a mega blockbuster that leveraged state-of-the-art computer graphics to bring dinosaurs to life like never before. The gaming industry, in turn, saw its fair share of Dinomania as well, with titles like Primal Rage, Turok the Dinosaur Hunter, and a whole host of Jurassic Park tie-ins, of course. But none of those video games dared to swing for the fences quite like Capcom's Dino Crisis, a game turned series which saw incredible highs and some embarrassing lows. Directly inspired by Jurassic Park and re-engineered from the bones of Resident Evil, Dino Crisis promised to transform the survival horror genre. And in many ways, it delivered on that promise. But it would only ever see 3 mainline entries, and despite a dedicated fanbase to this day, the series remains in a state of limbo. So let's dive into the history of Dino Crisis, the development and release of each title, and the uncertain future which the franchise now faces. This is going to be a good one, everyone, so strap in and let's go. How's it going, everyone? My name is Evan. Welcome back to the evilslaw channel. Really quick, before we get into it, I just want to ask if you enjoy this video to hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. And at any point during this video, if you feel nostalgic, if you have a memory, or if you're just interested in Dino Crisis, leave me a comment down below. Let's move the conversation there. So, to begin talking about the history of Dino Crisis, we need to take a quick look back at the game which laid the foundations for it, and the survival horror genre altogether. You knew it was coming, 1996's Resident Evil. Development on Resident Evil, or Biohazard in Japan, originally began as a remake of Sweet Home, a horror-themed Famicom RPG which never saw release outside of Japan. Releasing in 1989 alongside a horror movie of the same name, Sweet Home was praised for the way that it managed to convey a sense of dread and horror despite the limitations and simplicity of the Famicom hardware. It featured a party of 5 main characters trying to escape a haunted mansion, and the stakes were really high. If a party member succumbed to a trap within the mansion or an attack from a ghost, that was it. It was permadeath. They were dead forever and you couldn't bring them back. Sweet Home was tense and atmospheric, and many players felt Capcom's game outshined the movie it released alongside. Flash forward to 1993, and Sweet Home's director, Tokuro Fujiwara, wanted the company to take another crack at his game. Now serving as producer, Fujiwara brought on Capcom's resident Disney game expert, Shinji Mikami, to direct the new project, originally slated as a 2D remake for the Super Famicom. Mikami admitted he was reluctant to join up because he hated being scared, but he accepted the challenge anyway. Over the next 3 years, this project would evolve from a remake of Sweet Home into something entirely original, though it did retain many of that game's core elements like resource management, the use of notes to progress the plot, and a setting within a deserted mansion. Development moved from the Super Famicom to the Sony PlayStation, and Mikami took inspiration from early 3D games like Alone in the Dark to bring the game to life. In 1996, Biohazard would release and revolutionize the gaming industry, laying claim to the survival horror genre as we know it. The game sold millions, receiving ports to a whole host of platforms, and it remains one of the most influential games ever released to this day. But you already knew all of that. What's more important is it also propelled the career of Shinji Mikami, earning him a promotion from a game designer and director to a full-on producer. He would be tasked with effectively replacing Fujiwara, who left Capcom to form his own company shortly after Resident Evil's release. And while all of this was going on, in the background, a young game designer by the name of Shu Takumi was cutting his teeth behind the scenes at Capcom. He joined the company in 1994, 2 years before Resident Evil, and spent a lot of time in one of Capcom's training rooms, where young developers would learn more about their craft from the inside. Takumi spent a long while in training, watching his peers get picked to help out on games. He was one of the last ones in his class to get picked. Eventually, he would find a spot working on the PS1 anime tie-in game, Scary School Rumors, Hanako-san is Here. After that, Takumi fell into what he calls a blank period, pitching several projects, all of which would never see the light of day. It wasn't until after the release of Resident Evil when Takumi would be approached by Shinji Mikami and chosen to work on a brand new project. By late 1996, Mikami had stepped into this producer role and oversaw the development of the next Resident Evil game and beyond, though he admittedly didn't care for this role all that much. Restructuring at Capcom landed him at the top, however, he no longer had direct creative control of projects like he used to. There was an idea that he found worthy, one which centered on an island setting filled with large snakes and gorillas where the player needed to solve puzzles in order to escape. Directly inspired by Jurassic Park and its sequel The Lost World, Mikami suggested that the game shift to dinosaurs as the game's main enemy type, and just as things started to pick up steam, the whole project got put on hold. At the same time, development on Resident Evil 2 wasn't going so well. Mikami and the project's director, Hideki Kamiya, weren't seeing eye to eye on a lot of key aspects, and the deadline for the game's release was fast approaching. During this time, RE2 was almost completely different than the final product, and the team working on the Dinosaur project would get called in to help finish work on the game's current build. Takumi recalled the team being temporarily disbanded for about 3 months, but all of that work would end up being for naught. Soon after, it was decided that Resident Evil 2 would be completely rewritten and restarted from scratch. This prototype, now referred to as Resident Evil 1.5, never saw the light of day, at least in any official capacity. Thankfully, in 1998, Resident Evil 2 would emerge from this troubled development for the better. It was a huge success, and the development team was left seasoned for whatever the series had in store, at least for the near future. This allowed Mikami and Shu Takumi to return to the Dinosaur project, and they hit the ground running. With Dino Crisis, the team that would become Production Studio 4 didn't want to make another Resident Evil-style horror game. They focused on ways to evolve the established formula, ramping up the tension at all times and trying their best to make the game feel more real. Shinji Mikami returned as the game's producer and later its director. Originally, Shu Takumi was selected as director, but by his own admission, he said his lack of experience in the role was evident. After there was internal mix-ups several times, Mikami took over directing duties through to the finish line. Takumi would shift to planning out the game's first half. If it wasn't already obvious, Jurassic Park was the clear inspiration, and Mikami was happy to tell the world that.
It's unbelievable. This is just like that movie.
Revealed at the March Tokyo Game Show in 1999, Dino Crisis was a looker, and even managed to steal some of the headlines away from the also announced Resident Evil 3. Perhaps it was the game's shift to totally 3D rendered environments, a stark departure from Resident Evil's pre-rendered backgrounds and static camera angles. By this time, the game was already pretty far along in development, just a few months before its scheduled release. It made another appearance at E3 that year before it came out in July in Japan, and the States had to wait until the end of August. Europe, a little bit longer, came out on October 29th. If you managed to grab a copy at launch, the game included a demo disc for Resident Evil 3, and since it released so close, RE3 would go on to include a Dino Crisis demo. According to Mikami, the team consisted of about 35 people. Development took 2 years and 7 months from beginning to end, and the final product did not disappoint.
Something's coming from the creator of Resident Evil, Dino Crisis. Dino Crisis, only from Capcom.
One of the defining mantras of the Dino Crisis development cycle was the idea of moving past survival horror. This was never supposed to be Resident Evil with dinosaurs, though Capcom, and undoubtedly the people in the marketing team, came up with a new term: panic horror. Dino Crisis sees you playing as Regina, a member of the American Secret Operation Raid Team on a mission to recover a brilliant scientist named Dr. Kirk, who developed a revolutionary new energy source and promptly left the country. Shortly after arriving at a research facility on the Borginian island of Ibis, the team realizes the whole place is crawling with dinosaurs, and their teammate, who had all the communications gear, well, he met a rather unfortunate fate. With this setup, the idea of panic horror starts to take shape. Mikami and the team wanted to evolve the formula perfected in Resident Evil. In those games, there was often time to catch your breath. After a few hours, the zombies in the rooms cleared out, and the tension would be replaced with a calm sense of safety. But with Dino Crisis, the team crafted a kinetic, oppressive atmosphere which offered little time to breathe and a constant sense of dread. Graphically, the fully 3D environments lent the game a distinctly different look versus its Resident Evil cousins. But more importantly, this change allowed the developers to craft a much more cinematic experience, with set angles juxtaposed against wide panning shots in long hallways or quick turns around tight corners. Just like Resident Evil, the perspective is completely out of player control, but this time, the perspective could be handcrafted in a way it couldn't in Resident Evil. There were so many more ways to hide the terror, and what they were hiding was something players had never dealt with before. The The dinosaurs are a perfect foil to Resident Evil zombies. There's not a huge variety of them, sure, but what's lacking in that department is made up for by their intelligence. They relentlessly chase you down whenever you're in the same room, with attacks ranging from tail whips, which could actually knock your gun out of your hand, to devastating bites which cause Regina to start bleeding out. And you better have the right item to stop the bleeding, because if you don't have a hemostat on hand, well, it's time to start running to find one before your time runs out. Furthermore, in this game, the dinosaurs can chase you through rooms, and they do so very regularly. It ends up being a huge relief when they don't follow you through the door. Even better, sometimes when you return to a room after a long while, you can catch a dinosaur sleeping on the job, often able to tiptoe around them and conserve your ammo. And that's a strategy you might want to seriously consider, because the resources in this one are tight. Through the opening hours, I ran out of ammo on several occasions, learning to ration out my resources and consider which dinosaurs were actually worth keeping alive. Other times you'll end up resorting to tranquilizer darts to temporarily lull the beast to sleep. As long as you have the appropriate materials, you can craft more whenever you like. What you can't do here is access all of the items that you found in any given room. The universal item boxes from RE are gone for good, instead replaced by individual ammo or medical boxes posted up in various rooms around the facility. These boxes notably aren't located in safe rooms, so each trip is a risk in itself. You also need keys or plugs in order to unlock them, and overall, a trip to the item box is a much more tense experience. There's a few more differences here versus RE as well, and the addition of QuickTime events in some of the cutscenes. All in all, these changes come together beautifully and, in my opinion, create a masterful horror experience, one which truly feels distinct from the foundation it was based on. Survival horror saw players alternating incremental moments of terror and calm. Panic horror was like a never-ending run for your life. Upon its release, Dino Crisis was a critical darling. Fans in the gaming press absolutely loved it. GameSpot gave the game an 8.5 out of 10, GamePro gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and IGN slapped it with a 9.2 out of 10. Whatever pushed it from a 9 to a 9.2, I don't know. Game review skills have always been extremely weird. But besides that, Dino Crisis performed exceptionally well for Capcom. Overall, the PS1 version would go on to sell 2.4 million copies, enough to earn a greatest hits reprint and a place on Capcom's Platinum Titles list. DC would also see ports to the PC and the Sega Dreamcast 1 year later. A port to the Game Boy Color was announced, but never materialized. Interestingly, this attempted GBC version would actually see two builds by two completely different developers. A few screenshots exist between the two, though no playable version has emerged like the Game Boy Color port of the first Resident Evil. But when all the dust was settled, Dino Crisis was a bona fide hit, so naturally, the team at Capcom got right to work on a sequel. Dino Crisis was always meant to be more than Resident Evil with dinosaurs. However, despite the litany of changes made to that formula, Dino Crisis had a hard time shedding that title. In the aforementioned 9.2 review from IGN, author Doug Perry concluded by saying, "The only problem with the idea is that Dino Crisis, no matter how many changes or advances it's made, or how big it is, well, Resident Evil with dinosaurs." According to Shu Takumi in a 2019 interview with community leader Jaw Muncher, the panic horror of the first Dino Crisis was pretty much a necessary design choice. Hardware limitations on the PlayStation meant that 3D environments and hordes of dinosaurs to mow down were incompatible, so the team went with horror over action to compensate for the lower enemy count. So for Dino Crisis 2, the decision was made to get out of Resident Evil's shadow and move the series in a completely different direction. With an expanded team of about 50, Dino Crisis 2's development kicked off with some major reorganization within Production Studio 4. Shinji Mikami had a lot on his plate, so he took a step back from producing and directing to instead serve as executive producer, looking over the project from afar. Director duties were handed over to Shu Takumi once again, a role which he wouldn't be fired from this time around. And in the producer role was Hiroyuki Kobayashi, a primary designer for the first game. With Dino Crisis 2, the focus would shift from panic horror to arcade-style action, highlighting gunplay and enemy variety over item management and puzzle solving. In an interview, Kobayashi described the game's guiding principle as embracing the exhilaration of defeating a succession of dinosaurs. The game's narrative would be handled not by Production Studio 4, but by Flagship, another division of Capcom headed up by the same man who rewrote Resident Evil 2 and saved it from doom. Oh yeah, and there was one more big change. They had to lose the fully rendered environments to accommodate the hordes of dinosaurs that players would be facing. So it was back to old reliable 3D character models over pre-rendered 2D backgrounds. With everything set, Dino Crisis 2 would fly through development. It was released in Japan and North America in September of 2000, a turnaround time of about 1 year and 2 months after the first game.
Pure prehistoric terror. Dino Crisis 2, rated M for mature.
Upon starting it up, Dino Crisis 2 immediately feels different than its predecessor. The environments are pre-rendered, yes, but the whole setting in general shifts from a gray research facility to a lush prehistoric jungle. And the pace is miles faster. You can feel it right away. And it makes sense, because this time around the action comes first. Regina and her co-protagonist Dylan sprint forward by default. You can run and gun for real this time, aided by a generous helping of aim assist and a quick use sub-weapon. And the triangle button makes the 180-degree quick turn from Resident Evil 3 even simpler to pull off. All of these tools will help you fend off the hordes of dinosaurs in front of you, with enemies spawning in greater variety and much greater numbers. The raptors, which used to take 8 to 10 bullets to kill, now only take 1 or 2. Just remember though, they hunt in packs now. The shift to action is all facilitated by a new central game mechanic called extinction points, which are constantly being earned by killing, countering, and chaining together combos against dinosaurs. You'll see the points pop up all the time, and if you manage to clear a room without taking damage, well, there'll be a nice bonus awaiting for you during the transition screen. These extinction points can be saved up and spent at save terminals and safe rooms across the map, where you can buy new weapons, upgrades, ammo refills, and health items. They really do become your lifeline, so it's important to always have some in the bank at all times, especially if you find yourself bleeding without a hemostat again. Overall, Dino Crisis 2 is certainly a departure from its predecessor, but it's still a ton of fun. The story is way more fantastical this time, but it fits with the blood and guts rampage that the game packs in store. Playing it for the first time for this video, it's one I absolutely intend to return to. And critics at the time felt similarly, with some giving Dino Crisis 2 even higher marks compared to the first game. GamePro gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. GameSpot rated it a 9.2 versus the first game's 8.5, and the Cincinnati Enquirer really liked it. And our friends at IGN went just a tad higher. Just a tad. Like the first game, Dino Crisis 2 would go on to become a sales success despite its very late release in the PlayStation's life, totaling 1.9 million copies for Sony's first machine. Shu Takumi and the team were proud of their work reinventing the series, and he continues to cite it as one of his favorite projects he's worked on. Dino Crisis 2 never made it to the Dreamcast, but a port did hit the PC in late 2002, well past the Dreamcast's expiration date. A port was announced for the PS2, but it never ended up happening. So far, the team was 2 for 2, but it would take a few years before we would see another mainline Dino Crisis. So after the success of the first 2 games in 1999 and 2000 respectively, Capcom tried to keep the momentum going with 2 spin-off games for the PlayStation 2 and for Java-based cell phones. The first was Dino Stalker, released for the PS2 in 2002. This is the 3rd entry in Capcom's Gun Survivor series, and the only one that doesn't bear the Resident Evil name. These games never really reviewed well, and as much as Capcom wanted to make light guns work, well, it was never meant to be. I should also correct myself from a previous video, really quick. Resident Evil Survivor 2 was not a Japan exclusive. I apologize to all of my European Gun Survivor homies, that one's on me. But Dino Stalker revolves around a World War II pilot who slips into a time disruption and ends up in the prehistoric jungle of Dino Crisis 2. It's a really short light gun game marred by very unwieldy controls. Critics at the time didn't like it, but Dino Stalker does have its fans. It would also end up being the last Dino Crisis game with any story connection to the previous 2 games, but more on that in just a minute. The second spin-off was Dino Crisis Dungeon in Chaos, a first-person maze game developed for Docomo cell phones in Japan. Released in 2003, there's not a lot to say about this one. I mean, what you see is what you get. I will say those 3D environments are pretty impressive for early cell phone technology, and the dinosaur sprites look pretty good too. And while all of this was going on behind the scenes at Capcom, the Dino Crisis team was cooking up the next mainline entry, but unfortunately, it would end up becoming the proverbial asteroid, which would leave the series all but extinct. Development on Dino Crisis 3 would begin right after they wrapped up on DC2, with the leadership team at Production Studio 4 again seeing a shakeup. Director Shu Takumi was out. Instead, he was offered a small team, 1 year, and the creative freedom to make any game he wanted within Capcom. That resulting project would go on to become Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. Takumi would write and direct the game himself, and it would spawn an entire franchise. The first Ace Attorney game also happens to be one of my favorites that were made. Kobayashi returned on as DC3's producer, and Shinji Mikami would again oversee as executive producer, though he had his attention in a number of places at this time. Resident Evil 4's development was going far from smoothly, and they accidentally created Devil May Cry in the whole process. The original pitch for Dino Crisis 3 was a continuation of 2's time disruption themes. It would all take place in a big city filled with bloodthirsty dinosaurs. There does exist one image of that concept, and it was actually how the game was first announced at E3 2001. However, the idea of any mass tragedy taking place in a city had to be scrapped following the September 11th attack. So Capcom went full Jason X and moved the game into space. The second Dino Crisis was wildly different from the first, so why not do it again, right? Taking place over 500 years after Dino Crisis 2, this iteration would have very little connection to the previous games. The setup reads like some sort of amalgamation between Alien and Event Horizon, with a team of specialized space soldiers being sent to a previously lost colony ship called the Ozymandias. The ship is home to an evil AI control system which could transform the ship like a mecha and create genetically engineered Frankenstein-together dinosaurs. Yeah, technically they're not even dinosaurs in this one, but it sure does make for a convenient plot device. Another major change for Dino Crisis 3 was the console it would be shipping on. Capcom unveiled the game exclusively for Microsoft's Xbox, a bold move considering the console's then uncertain status, especially in Japan. A prototype of the spacified Dino Crisis 3 would later be shown at the 2002 Xbox conference, looking a bit different than the final product, most notably in the game's HUD. Kobayashi insisted it was the Xbox's graphical power which led the project to become a platform exclusive. And when asked about the game's lack of connection to previous titles, he teased that we would see more Regina eventually because, quote, she's hot. Despite being announced before the Xbox hit the market, Dino Crisis 3 would wind up releasing in June of 2003, well after the console's initial launch window. It would also mark the beginning of a sharp downfall for Capcom's once promising franchise. Like Dino Crisis 2, the third game would focus more on action and the fun of shooting dinosaurs. The points and shop system were both back, though with a questionable limit on how many points you could have at any one time. And Dino Crisis 3's pace was even faster thanks to the introduction of futuristic rocket boosting and jetpacks, though this design choice ended up becoming a major issue by the end of development. You see, Dino Crisis 3 returns to the fully polygonal environments, but the camera remains fixed at preset angles and movements similar to Dino Crisis 1. But since the game moves at such a fast speed, you'll often find yourself swapping between different angles every few seconds or so. Calling it whiplash would be underselling the entire experience, and most of the time, I swear, the enemies that you're shooting at aren't even on screen. It's a constant issue. I feel like every camera angle they picked is the wrong one, and so many times the camera angle changes and you're either thrown for a loop or the controls completely flip on you. You'll get hit by charging and lunging enemies that you didn't even know were there. It happens all the time, and you die pretty fast in this game. I used several continues just in the first level alone. According to one Capcom Unity moderator with inside knowledge of what happened, apparently the game's camera was very different at one point, much more responsive and free-flowing, but it ran into some bugs late into development, and the team lost the guy in charge of fixing it. They scrambled to come up with a solution before deadline, so they agreed to go back to the familiar fixed camera angles, which left the game off worse for wear. Critical reception was mixed at best, thanks in no small part to the lousy camera, bland environments, and extreme lack of enemy variety. IGN gave it a 6 out of 10, repeatedly calling the game's perspective the worst camera ever. GameSpot went lower at a 5.4 out of 10, and Edge magazine hated it, awarding the game a mere 3 out of 10. And somehow, public sentiment among gamers and fans was even worse.
It's a good sign you have an abysmal sequel when its developer respectfully declines follow it up.
Today, many fans of the series still refuse to accept the existence of Dino Crisis 3. Making matters worse, the game was a commercial failure, and it didn't meet Capcom's internal sales goal of 580,000 copies. All in all, Dino Crisis 3 was a bona fide disaster, and it would become the first real miss for the 4-year-old franchise. You'd think the series was still young and unafraid to make big changes, so it seemed logical that Capcom would go back to the drawing board and try again. But that's far from what would actually occur. Following DC3's failure, Capcom just never went back to the drawing board on the series. Perhaps it was Dino Crisis' true lack of an identity, evolving from the shell of Resident Evil into a franchise with 3 very different games. Dino Crisis 3 performing the way it did was no help either. But during the mid to late 2000s, Capcom started to refocus their efforts, looking at new entries in their most profitable franchises and a broad push to appeal to Western gamers in new ways. One of those attempts was the Bionic Commando reboot, and hot take, I kinda like this game. Smaller franchises like Dino Crisis and Onimusha would fall by the wayside, effectively replaced during the 6th generation by new successful efforts like Monster Hunter and Devil May Cry. Throughout the 2010s, rumors emerged about the possibility of a new Dino Crisis, though nothing would actually end up becoming material. In 2014, news spread that a Dino Crisis title would be unveiled at that year's Tokyo Game Show, and that never happened. The next year, Shinji Mikami said he still had ideas for the franchise, but nothing would become of them. According to Capcom leaker Dust Golem, several attempts were made throughout the 2010s to revive Dino Crisis, including one by the now defunct Capcom Vancouver. None made it out of the prototype stage, with Capcom still struggling to figure out what direction to take the franchise next. And right as I was editing this video, Capcom released new information on which series they planned to grow in the future, putting up this graphic in a business release. And as you can see, there's no Dino Crisis, which led a lot of people in the comments to voice their displeasure. As much as I would love to tell you otherwise, that's pretty much where things stand today. Dino Crisis 1 and 2 would see digital re-releases as part of the PlayStation Store's PS1 Classics program in 2006, and then things would go dark for nearly a decade. It wouldn't be until 2024 when the first Dino Crisis would make it to PS4 and PS5 via the digital store, and later in January of 25, both games, Dino Crisis 1 and 2, came to PC thanks to help from the team over at GOG. And that's how I played Dino Crisis 2 for this video, and I'd say these PC ports are the most accessible ways to play Dino Crisis today. If you're a retro collector, these games tend to hang on the pricier side, especially the second game and the rare greatest hits variant of the first game. Even Dino Crisis 3 carries a fair bit of value, likely because it's never seen a port and has been marooned on the original Xbox. So in conclusion, as much as I would love to announce it to the world, Dino Crisis is not back. The series, which once showed so much success and promise, has remained relegated to the depths of Capcom's vaults. A new Dino Crisis in the style of a modern Resident Evil game would be amazing, and fans have been clamoring for it for years. Hell, just look at Resident Evil 9. The shop system in the Leon sections is basically the same as Dino Crisis 2. However, if we were to see Dino Crisis revived as some sort of Resident Evil style third-person horror game, I can't help but think that would put the series back exactly where it started. It would be a game built on the bones of Resident Evil, but lacking the identity that truly makes it unique. And thus, that is the situation which Dino Crisis lives in right now, and it's up to Capcom to surprise us and see what the future might hold. So with that, this is where I want to turn the conversation over to you guys. What do you think about Dino Crisis? Did you grow up playing them? Do you love these games? Do you hate these games? Do you think Capcom needs to give this series another shot? Let me know down in the comments, and let's start a conversation. That is my favorite part about making these videos. And with that, that's pretty much all I have for this one. My name is Evan. Thank you for stopping by the evilslaw channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.